Hey guys, I'm gonna get into another episode of When the Scriptures Become Real. It's a podcast where we learn, where we study, where we grow, where we try to become the best versions of ourselves as we can as we continue to serve our Lord. Can you guys find the podcast on YouTube or anywhere else you can get your podcast? We're just so thankful you guys are here and that you guys are with us today. All right, guys, I have literally been waiting all week for this because the stuff that I've been seeing through this is crazy, right? It's been such a great study. And thank you guys for your interaction, whether it's through Instagram, Facebook, whatever the case might be. If we put a poll out there, we have people talking, we have conversation. We're just so thankful for everything you guys do for the podcast family here. We're just so appreciative of that as we kind of journey through this together. So if you guys don't know, we are actually in a Jonathan series, and we've entitled this A Friend Like Jonathan. So obviously everybody knows Jonathan because of his friendship with David, which we're going to get to that. But we don't take the time to really look at how his account and how his life was built, the house that he lived in, the heart that he had, right? The heart that his father had. There's so many moving pieces that we can miss, but we got to let the Bible build these things together. So as we look at this is going to be such a great study as we continue to immerse ourselves and go and travel back in time and just walk through the text and just look at this together. I'm so excited to keep doing this with you guys. So if we're going to entitle this one, this is going to be A Friend Like Jonathan Part 3, and we're going to call this one The Poetry. A Friend Like Jonathan Part 3, we're going to call it The Poetry. Now, again, if you haven't watched the other two, please go back and listen or watch the first two so you can understand where we're picking up today. So here's why we're calling this The Poetry before we kind of give our recap and then hop right back in here. The reason why we're calling it The Poetry is because have you ever heard of the term, and maybe you use it, have you ever heard of the term poetry in motion? Right? So you talk about a basketball team, you talk about a person in their life, you talk about a business. When something seems to be working or the pieces seem to be coming together, we call it's like watching poetry in motion. So that implies you're seeing all the pieces, you've seen the pieces grow. You've seen the things that they've gone through. You've seen what they've gone through and how they've got out of it. And now seeing what they're doing now, it's literally like poetry in motion. So when we think about Jonathan and David, as we're going to begin their friendship pretty much at the end of this, as we look at it, you're going to start to see from Jonathan's perspective, look at all the moving pieces in his life that we've seen in part 1 and 2. We've seen the fear of his father. We've seen the intimidation that he had among people. We've seen the house that Jonathan had to live in. We've also seen Jonathan's fearlessness. We've seen how he feared God. There's so many moving pieces that we've seen. And if you just take that piece, right? If you take that piece of Jonathan's life and you kind of just look at it for what it is on the surface, you can appreciate what Jonathan has done. But at the same time, you can also say, but I just don't think there's certain things that can happen for him because the situation is so bad. Well, because the house that he's in is so bad, because his father won't let him do anything, because the people of Israel are always fearful. So Jonathan's a good guy, but I don't see his life kind of propelling anywhere from this point. And that's the thing, guys, as we continue to move forward here, many times you can look at your life like that. Right? You can look at your life and you can see, well, I'm a decent person, right? I'm pretty good. Or even if you have a love for God, man, I truly want to do what God wants me to do, but my circumstances, this is kind of, how do I put it? This is kind of where your life caps, right? So it's like you can't propel to another level. It's like your life has capped to this point. And what I mean by cap, I mean, this is the farthest you can go. Meaning, well, everything that you're doing right now, you're not going to get past that. You're just going to stay doing what you're doing, right? And many times we can look at our life and we're not seeing certain things and certain pieces of how God can use our life to help us do things we never thought we could do. And this is what we're going to see. And this is how we're going to start journeying with Jonathan. So here's where we're going here. So remember last week. Now remember, I told you guys to study this, read this, and look at this because we're going to keep referring back to this verse. Remember 1 Samuel 14? Remember verse number 6 when Jonathan went up with his armor bearer? And Jonathan told him in verse 6, let's go over to the garrison of the Philistines It may be that the Lord is going to work for us. For nothing restrains the Lord from saving by many or saving by few. Please keep that in mind, because that is a golden nugget, right? That's a gold nugget right there. So keep that in mind. Or 1 Samuel 14:6. Now we find ourselves in 1 Samuel 16. So the account picks up as we begin our journey together, as we're walking through and we're going back to Israel at this time together. Remember in 14:15, remember the last thing that we see is we see Jonathan being fearless, but we see Saul being fearful, right? And we see all of these things happening, and we see Saul being rejected as king, 1 Samuel 15, and now someone else is going to be anointed. Someone else is coming. So we're taking a break quickly from Saul and Jonathan. We've seen what we need to see from them. Now we're moving our eyes and we're putting our glasses directly on David. Now we find ourselves in 1 Samuel 16. Let's go. Here we go. Verse 1. Now the Lord said to Samuel. Now remember, at this point, Samuel had just told Saul in chapter 15, he just told him, look, the kingdom is taken away from you and is going to be given to a man that's better than you, right? To a fearful man, right, who fears the people. This is not what Saul wants to hear. So now he's mourning for Saul because of what he had to tell him. But this is important. I don't want you to miss these details here in verse 1 and 2. Now the Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul? Seeing I have rejected him reigning over Israel, fill your horn with oil and go. I'm sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons. Now watch verse 2. Samuel said, now remember, this is a prophet now. Samuel had told Saul a lot of things up to this point, but I want you to notice, remember how we looked at Saul and we saw how fearful he was, and therefore because he wanted to please the people, he became a lord over the people, and he made things harder for them than what it should have been. This is the effect of it even on Samuel. Watch verse 2. And Samuel said, this is crazy. Samuel said, how can I go? If Saul hears it, then he will kill me. Isn't that interesting? A prophet of God, if Saul hears this, he's going to kill me. So think about Saul's reach. A man that's so fearful, and inside he knows that he wants to please the people. He's so intimidating to everybody around him that notice what happens. Even that intimidation factor, it hits Samuel. Here's, sometimes what we got to do, we've kind of lost, and I'm including myself in this when I say we've kind of lost the ability to look at ourselves and look at our red flags. Now, you can always determine, and you can always look at someone else, and you can always look at another leader and another family and another man and another woman, and you can see what they're doing, and you can see and point out their red flags, but you can't see yours, and you don't want to see yours, but you have to be able to look at your own red flags. So here's what I mean by that. Notice verse 2. Here's a red flag of Saul that he could never see in himself. And here may be a red flag that you might have, that I might have, that we don't know that we have. If there's a level, possibly, now you got to look at things. I'm not saying this is the case, okay? But this is just a self-examining question. It doesn't have to be yes, but this is a question. Is it possible, if you are in a leadership position, is it possible that if others are intimidated by you, it's not because of you, it's because of how you're leading? Even Samuel was intimidated by Saul. Why? Because what was Saul? He knew in his heart of hearts, he was fearful. He knew that. So therefore, in order to cover that fearfulness, he had to up the level and be that passive aggressive, intimidating leader, because he had to get some level of respect from the people. So now that has literally trickled down all throughout Israel, and that's even gotten to Samuel. Man, how am I, if I go tell Saul, if I do this, Saul's going to kill me. You see the danger and you see the responsibility that it is to be a leader of God. Sometimes we kind of have this, I don't know, we kind of like when we walk into the room and people are like, hold on. We kind of like that, right? We won't say it, but we get something off that. We got to be careful, you know. Again, there's certain things we just have to be careful with, okay? Even though certain things may not be sin, we got to be careful. We got to be careful because we don't want to be the type of leader like Saul to where we're so intimidating that the people are fearful of us. And then we're so intimidating that the other leader, Samuel, the prophet, is fearful. See, you see the trickle down effect of one man's fear. We learned that in part 1. And we're getting all this from 2 verses right now. The picture is literally painting itself. Watch what he says. But the Lord said, watch this. Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Then invite Jesse to that sacrifice, and I will show you what you will do. And you will anoint for me the one that I name to you. You see how the Lord comforted Samuel in that moment? Again, what do we talk about? Saul is fearful. Is it wrong for a leader, for a prophet, for a Christian, for a father, a mother, whoever it is? Is it wrong to be fearful of things? No, it's not wrong. That's a human emotion. But Saul was being led by his fear. Samuel was fearful of Saul in this moment, but notice how God comforted that fear. And God said, no, you're not doing this for Saul. You're doing this for me. You're doing this for me. So he reassures Samuel, why you're doing what you're doing. You're not doing it for Saul. You're doing it for me. It's a great concept. So then verse 4, Samuel did what the Lord said, went to Bethlehem. The elders of the town trembled at his coming and said, do you come peaceably? And he said, peaceably I come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves. Come with me to sacrifice. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons, and then he invited them to his sacrifice. So watch this, verse 6. This is important. So it was when they came that he looked at Eliab, right? And he said, surely this is the Lord's anointed. This is the one that needs to stand before him. But then the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at his appearance or his physical stature, but I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Verse 8, so then Jesse called Aminadab. Keep these names in mind. Eliab, then Aminadab's number 2, because this is going to matter later. Then he called Aminadab, and he made him pass before Samuel. And he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then Jesse made Shammah. Keep that one. That's 3. Then the Lord made Shammah. I held up a 4 on the video. I got to go back to school. 3, Shammah, right? Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, neither has the Lord chosen this one. Then in verse 10, thus Jesse made the rest of the 7 sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these either. And Samuel said to Jesse, are the young men here? Then he said, there remains the youngest. There he is keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here. So he went and brought him in. He was ruddy, with bright eyes, good looking. And the Lord said, arise, anoint him, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and he went to Ramah. Now, here's what's interesting. As we look at this is a little different from when Saul was anointed. So notice there's a little more communication here between Samuel and God. So every single son that walks by, this is not the right one. This is not the right one. This is not the right one. But then he comes to David. This is the one, right? He is the one that's anointed. And then Samuel anointed him. Verse 13. Now, keep in mind the brothers' names. Eliab, Aminadab, and Shammah. Those are the 3 oldest brothers. That is going to matter as we keep moving forward because there's something in them that they have that David doesn't have. Again, it's going to be interesting, but we're going to keep going. Now, we see that the Spirit of the Lord is now upon David. Okay, the Bible's building up this story and we're journeying along as we see what's happening. So we're leaving this coronation with David. Now we're going back to Saul for a minute in verse 14. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this because this could be a whole nother series and a whole nother podcast on its own. But here's the concept. Well, people say, well, a distressing spirit came from the Lord. So I guess that means evil comes from the Lord because the text says the spirit came from God and it was distressing Saul. That's not the case. So when it means that it's the spirit, the distressing spirit came from the Lord allows it to happen. So think about this. So that's just like saying if you're a parent and you have a son or a daughter, and that's like saying if you let the son, even though you know the right choice to make, you let the son or daughter make a choice and they make the wrong choice, they could easily say, well, that choice came from you because you let me do it. No, that's not the case. What it is you're allowing them to make a choice because you're showing love by letting them be a free moral agent. Now you're learning, you're growing, you're disciplining, you're doing all these things that a good parent does, but you're not taking control of them. The Lord is not taking control of Saul by saying, here, evil spirit. The Lord is allowing, because this is who Saul wants to be. He's allowing that fear in Saul's heart to germinate because that's what Saul wants. That's what that means from the text, okay? So now this is what's happening. Now all this fear, now this is super important. So think about this. Look at the, what's the right word? Look at the effects, I guess. Look at the effects of fear. So we saw from part 1, the fear of one man. Now I want you to notice how dangerous fear is. Because of that fear, not only was Saul not the king that he needed to be, he was afraid of the people. He wasn't the father that he needed to be. And notice, there's going to be a problem here. Notice another effect of that fear. This is crazy. Watch verse 14. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said to him, surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. Let our master now command your servants who go before you to seek out a man who is a skillful player on the harp. And it shall be that he will play it with his hand when the distressing spirit from God is upon you, and you will be well. So Saul said to his servants, verse 17, provide me a man who can play well and bring him to me. Then one of the servants answered and said, look, I have seen a son of Jesse the Bethlehemite who is skillful in playing. He's a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, a handsome person, and the Lord is with him. Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me your son David, who is with the sheep. And Jesse took a donkey loaded with bread, a skin of wine, a young goat, and sent him by his son David to Saul. And David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly and became his armor bearer. Then Saul said to Jesse, saying, let David stand before me, for he has found favor in his sight. And it was so that whenever the distressing spirit from God was upon Saul, that David would take a harp and play with it in his hand. Then Saul would become refreshed and well, and the distressing spirit would depart from him. Here's what's interesting. A couple things for you to chew on. Again, this is the beauty of study. When you study, you got to chew on some things and you got to meditate on these things. So here's a possibility. I'm not saying this is the case, but here's some things that I've read. It's very possible that Saul did have a mental problem, right? Some people say that Saul had bipolar issues. Some people say Saul had a ridiculously a high amount of anxiety. It's possible. I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not saying it is the case or it's not, but that's something that we need to consider. Because remember, later on down the line, we see Saul's in there throwing javelins at his own son, and he's throwing it at David. There's points where you see Saul kind of almost being a different person, right? You see that. So is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. But here's my assessment as we look at this. Now, again, we're all studying this together, okay? So here's what I'm seeing. It's possible that he could have had those things, but here's the effect of his fear, in my opinion. And I think the Bible will support this later as we continue to study. I think his level of fear, because remember, think about what Saul is doing. We saw him from the very beginning. Like we said before, I don't believe Saul was a man that was just waiting for his opportunity to take over. I don't think he was that evil, and I don't think he was that diabolical from the beginning. I believe Saul was a good man, but seeds were planted in his heart that he allowed to germinate. I believe that is the Saul that we know. Okay. So now up to this point, now because this is not who he is, he's starting to be more fearful. Now think about this. If you're a king and you're starting to be more fearful, remember, where was Saul at his coronation? He was hiding in the equipment. The Lord had to tell the people, hey, look, there he is. He's over there. Here's what's important about this. As Saul is letting this seed germinate, if you become more fearful of this, especially being a king, then guess what you're also fearful of? If you're fearful of the people, then guess what you're afraid of doing too? You're afraid of making a choice. Then you're afraid of making a decision. Why? Because what happens if you make a decision that a majority of the people don't like? Then what if they don't like you? Then what if they do something to you? Then what if they want to do all these other things and get you out of the kingdom? Now you're starting to stress over things that you shouldn't have to be stressful for. So now you're thinking about all these things, and now not only are you fearful, but now you're always looking behind your back. Now you can't get any sleep. Now you're always overthinking every little decision because you're thinking about how so many other people are going to respond to something that maybe the Lord wants you to do, but now you're stuck, right? Now you're almost kind of paralyzed because you're trying to please so many different groups of people that now you don't know how to make a choice. So think about the level of anxiety that builds up within Saul. I believe that's what he faced. I believe his mind was literally always on 1,000. He always had so many things going on in his mind. And I believe that fear that we saw that the Bible built up from chapter 8, I think it has germinated, and I think it has taken such root within himself that now he has become such a fearful man. Now, no one else would know that he's fearful because what's he doing to the people? He's being over intimidating and he's being overly passive aggressive. So people may not have known that he was fearful, but the most important person that he knew that was fearful was himself. And that will mess with anybody, even a king. I think that's his issue. And when David would come, now think about David for a second. You're going through all these things and you got all these decisions and you got all these things. And now notice, what does Saul understand? Saul knows the kingdom's gone from me. Now, guess what else he's thinking? Man, who's the Lord going to pick? Who's the Lord going to anoint? He said somebody was better than me. Do I have to fight him? Do I have to grow my armies bigger? I don't want to lose this position. You see, look at all the stuff that's on his mind. A ridiculous amount of stuff is on his mind. So now he's there, and now David is playing the harp. And as David is playing the harp, for that moment in that pocket in time, for however long that was, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, an hour, whatever the case might be, for that pocket of time, Saul had peace. Because in that moment when David was playing the harp, there was nothing to think about. There's nothing to think about. I think that's the problem that Saul's facing. And I think that explains so many other things as we keep moving. So I wanted to let you know that's kind of, I believe that his problems that he dealt with, obviously I'm not ruling out other things, but based off what I'm seeing from the text, I believe it strongly proves that fear that we saw from him in chapter 8, it has taken root. And that fear, notice what it does, guys. I think Saul from the beginning, he wasn't a bad person. But notice what that fear did with him. It changed who he was. Here's the thing, guys. What fear will do for you as a father, as a mother, as a leader, as a son, as whoever it is, it will change who you are. I promise you that. Fearfulness will change you. And what it will do, it will make you overthink situations that's not even there. It'll make you think you know what other people are thinking. It'll make you put blanket statements on groups of people that you don't even know what they're thinking. It'll make you so paranoid because you're so afraid of a certain outcome happening, and that outcome 99.9% of the time is not going to happen. But because your fear has been so instilled in your heart somehow, you're going to overthink every little thing because you think you're so fearful. That's the danger, guys. And I think that's Saul's problem. He's living in this fear daily. Plus being a king. That'll wear anybody out. That'll wear anybody out. And for you, that's going to make you fearful, guys. I mean, you remember growing up, there were some shows on PBS, and there were some different shows, but I remember there was a show that there was a kid, and he always overthought everything, and he would always have these dreams where he had 4 or 5 scenarios of the same problem, and he tried to pick which scenario was going to happen. So now he literally dreamt it. He's thinking about it. He's meditating on it. And now when he sees these people, he thinks what happened in his dream, they're really thinking that. They really believe that. They really hate him. They really don't want to be around him. So now he's walking around, always looking around his shoulder because he's convinced himself through his own thoughts, this is what y'all think about me. And this is what I know what you're saying. And I know what you're thinking. And I know your thoughts. And I know what you're telling other people about me. And I know how you don't like me. And I know how you see what I'm saying? So now you're putting your thoughts and you're putting your conviction on other people, and they're not even thinking about those things, but you're treating them as they are. You see the crazy, insane side effect of fear? Fear will make you become this person. And this is the person that Saul has become. Look how he's changed from 1 Samuel 8 to 1 Samuel 16. The change is, this is a pretty quick change. It's crazy, but I think that's what he's dealing with. And that's what David has to come in and help alleviate with Saul. Okay, so now we get that image and now we get that picture, right? We get those gold nuggets from chapter 16. Now it gets crazier. Now we get in 17. Verse 1. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and they were gathered at Succoth, which begins to Judah. They encamped between Succoth and Azekah and Ephes and Damim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah and drew up in battle against the Philistines. The Philistines stood on the mountain on one side, Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, with the valley in between them. So now we have another snapshot here. So on this side, we have the Israelites. On this side, we have the Philistines, and then you have the valley in the middle. Okay, so this is the image that we're at. And a champion went out from among them of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. So now it gives Goliath's description, right? Verse 5, 6, 7. And notice what he says, verse 8. Then he stood and cried out to the armies of Israel and said, why have you come up to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine and you're the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourself and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail and kill him, then you will be our servants and you will serve us. Now you got ultimatums here. Now remember, up to this point, whenever you see the people with Saul, what is the people's demeanor? What did we see in 1 Samuel 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14? They trembled and they were afraid. What are they doing now with Saul on this side of the mountain, looking at Goliath and the Philistines? They're fearful. Notice, one seed of fear has made itself manifest among the entire nation. One seed planted in the heart of one man. We always say on the positive side, which is true, God plus one is enough, which I believe that's true. God loves more and more people to do his will, but God just needs one. Satan only needs one too. One seed. If I can plant one seed of doubt within this leadership, if I can plant one seed of doubt, it will grow within that person, and that person will make it grow within everybody else. This is the problem that's happening. Now, verse 11. When Saul heard these things, and when he heard the words of the Philistine, watch what happened. So he's included in this. They were dismayed, and they were greatly afraid. You see what's happening here? You're living in a constant state of some type of fear. That's Saul's problem. He's living in a state of perpetual 24/7 fear. That's his life. So this makes us understand him more. This makes us understand his outbursts more. This makes us understand his highs and lows more because we've seen him from chapter 8, right? We've grown up with him as we're seeing this. So here's my question. This is a cool question to chew on. Now, remember we saw last week in part 2 We saw how fearless Jonathan was. Here's my question for you to chew on and send me something. Let me know what you see as we study, because that's a part of studying together. Here's my question. If Jonathan was so fearless, why was Jonathan not there? Why was Jonathan not there? Now, here's a couple scenarios. It's possible that he could have been somewhere else. That's possible. It's possible, too, that he could have been on that mountain. But why did Jonathan not fight Goliath? Here's what I'm seeing thus far. I think Jonathan would have fought him. I think Jonathan would have fought Jonathan would have fought Goliath, because we saw a level of fearlessness that we didn't see in anyone else yet. I think Jonathan would have fought Goliath. But now here's how crazy this gets. Based off the context of every single thing we've taken 2 podcasts to look at, I think he wasn't allowed to fight him. Because remember, when Jonathan, who had less men every single time, when Jonathan had less men to go fight the Philistines, what did Saul always do? Saul always took credit for it. So do you think Saul wants Jonathan going out beating Goliath and taking another victory over him? Because guess what? Guess what I think Saul was afraid of? What if that person that is greater than me is my own son? Think about that. Samuel said someone greater than you is going to take the kingdom. What if that person, what if I'm so dug into what I'm doing? What if this person that's greater than me is my own son? Don't tell me that didn't cross his mind. Don't tell me that didn't cross his mind. So from what I see from the text, I believe Jonathan was held back. Now, I believe that because of this is from the human view, but we know that from God's perspective, this fight was always David's. I'm not saying this fight should never have been David's or it should have been Jonathan's. I'm not saying that. I'm just trying to get us to chew on, and I want you to think about how fearful Saul was. I think Jonathan was held back. And from how God works and how he makes poetry in motion, this fight was always meant for David, but I believe a man was willing to do it. And I believe that man was Jonathan. That's going to matter in a second, okay? I promise you that'll matter. Now let's watch what happens. Now remember David's older brothers, Aminadab, Eliab, and Shammah? Notice what happens, verse 13. Then the 3 oldest sons of Jesse, now we get more context. Now the 3 oldest sons of Jesse that we met as we journeyed to Jesse's house, they had gone to follow Saul to battle. The names of the 3 sons that went to battle were Eliab, Shammah, and Aminadab, and David was the youngest, verse 14, and the 3 oldest followed Saul. Okay, so now we understand why those 3 were mentioned when God said that's not the one, because this conversation with his 3 older brothers, it is huge, and I think we glaze over this conversation so much, but there's so much stuff within this conversation with his 3 big brothers. So now verse 17, 18, 19, 20, Jesse sends David to go and give provisions to his brothers. Take some cheeses, take all these things, and go give them to your brothers. Now watch what happens here. Verse 22, David left the supplies in the hand of the supply keeper. He ran to the army and came and greeted his brothers. Then when he talked with them, there was the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words. So David heard them. So the challenge that we heard in verses 8, 9, and 10, he said the same thing again. Now David heard it this time. Okay. Now keep in mind, poetry in motion. God is setting up this friendship between Jonathan and David. And I want to see the basis of how this is set up. So from this point on, I want you to look at David's life up to this point and look at Jonathan's life up to this point. And it is almost insane how close their lives were. It was almost like their lives were meant to cross. It's crazy. Let's keep going. Verse 24. So all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, what did they do, everybody? They ran. And what does the text say? They were dreadfully afraid. So now, who's seeing this? David. Remember in chapters before when Saul was fighting the Philistines, who else saw that everybody else was afraid? Jonathan. Huh. Interesting how both of them are seeing the same thing. Now let's keep going. So the men of Israel, verse 25, they said, have you seen this man that's come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel, and it will be that the man that kills him, the king will give him great riches and will give him his daughter and his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel. Then David spoke to the men who stood by him and said, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? Well, now watch the end of the verse. This is important. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of God? Keep that phrase in mind. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine who will defy the armies of God? And the people answered him in the manner and said, so it shall be done for the man that kills him. Now, this is so good. Verse 28. Now Eliab, this is the third mention of him now. Now Eliab, his older brother, heard what he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against who? Against David. Here's another trickle-down side effect of fear. Fear will also have you angry at people who are fearless. Fear will have you angry at people who are fearless. Now, what did it just say before? Everybody, verse 24, everybody fled and everybody was afraid. Question, who's included in that everybody? David's three older brothers. So now, David is coming in with a mindset of fearlessness. And now those that are fearful, now they get mad at those that are fearless. What's wrong with you? What's your problem? You see how we do, people? But notice, if we're looking at our own flag, our own red flags, is that how we've responded to people in our lives? Is that how we've responded to things? I'm looking at this too. Like I told you guys, I'm looking at this in real time. What are you doing? It's never been done. No, the Lord's not going to do that. He would have done it for us. So if he didn't do it for us, why do you think he'd do it for you? Now, here's what makes this conversation potentially detrimental to David. It's one thing for someone else to say that, right? It's one thing for a critic to say that. It's one whole thing for them to say it. This is family. This is family saying it. Now, this is a whole different level. This is a different level. Now, watch what's happening here. So then let's keep going. So Eliab, his older brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger, verse 28, was aroused against David, and he said, why did you come here? Why are you even here? You know, that's what fear does. Fear makes you, it's almost like this bubbling up what's inside you. And when it gets to a point where it bubbles up, then it overflows. So whoever's in the way is going to feel your wrath, right? That's just how it goes down. So now, watch what happens. And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride, and I know the insolence of your heart, David. You see, now what fear does, fear thinks you know people. Fear thinks you know what they're thinking. Fear thinks you know their motives. Fear thinks you think you know their heart. No, you don't. That's a sign of fear. That's a sign of fear when you think you know what people are thinking or doing. I know their heart. I know their type. Do you, though? I'm not trying to say you haven't seen certain things before. I'm not trying to negate that. But you can't do that with every single person. Can't do that. And Eliab is a case of somebody that's living in the fear of that one man that we looked at in part 1. You see the problem? You see what's being built here? It's insane. Now, I should keep going. Verse 29. This is so good, man. Verse 29. So think about this. They're trying to instill this fear into David. And David said, what did I do? What did I do now? Is there not a cause? Is there not a reason for me to speak out against this Philistine? So you're telling me I should be quiet? You're telling me I shouldn't do anything? You're telling me I shouldn't? Yeah, you shouldn't. Why? Because all of us aren't. All of us haven't done it. You see what fear does? Fear can't stay by itself. You got to make other people around you fearful. And we mentioned this last week. Again, this is the importance of, number one, speaking life into others through what Jesus said and through the words of God. But it's also, if you have that fearlessness of God within you, that spreads too. That spreads too in a good way. But what Eliab is doing, he's a product of Saul. And what Saul is doing, Saul is making everybody around him fearful. And now David, because everybody else is fearful, David's the sole one. Now he looks like the freak. Here's the thing, and I want to mention this to you guys. Let me give you this example before we go with this. Have you ever been in a situation where, and it doesn't have to be necessarily dire, but try to get my point here. You ever been in a situation where you're the only one there? It could be as simple as you go to a game and you're the only whatever fan there, right? Everybody around you is a fan of the other team, right? It can be as dire as you're the only one that thinks this decision is wrong, but everybody else is saying this decision is right. So now, here's the thing that can hinder you. Those that are around you can make you feel like you're the crazy one. And from David's perspective, that's family telling him that. Sometimes when you look at God's word and I'm just trying to follow what the word says. I'm just trying to do what the Bible says. Fear is going to be, how do I word it? Fear is going to be instilled in you through many forms for you not to follow the word. Oh, you're crazy. Oh, no, you're the only one. No one else thinks that decision is right. But David's saying, what have I done wrong? And then David's also saying, is there not a cause to speak out against this? Why is no one else? Well, that's just how the thing. You see all these excuses now, but it's like David's like, I don't see anything. Why is no one else doing anything about it? So now that anger that comes from Eliab, that anger, it's not really about David. If you really think about it, that anger that's coming out of him is that he's afraid to do something. And he's just mad that someone else wants to, or someone else has the trust to do it. Sometimes that's what we'll do, guys. We have to look at our own red flags. Sometimes what we'll do, we are mad at people that are willing to do the things that we know we should do. But for some reason, something is holding us back from doing it. So therefore we don't do it, but we get mad at somebody that does do it. That's what Eliab is in. That's his older brother, man. Think about how hard this situation is for David. This is different. And this gives my respect level for this young David so much more because we understand the conversation. We're not just skipping around. We're starting to understand this text. So now watch what happens. Verse 30. Then he turned from him towards another, and David said the same thing. What's the same thing David said? Well, since y'all don't want to listen, let me go talk to someone else. For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of God? For who else is this uncircumcised Philistine for he should defy the armies of God? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of God? Now, David's going around and David's saying, who is this? Come on, let's do this. David's going around trying to spread the fear of God in other people. But now watch what happens. Now, when they heard the words, verse 31, which David spoke, they were heard, and then these words were reported to Saul, who was scared himself. And Saul sent for him. Now, this is the process. Now all these words that you're saying are heard. Now they report you to the big one. Now, when everyone else doesn't want to do it, now because everybody else is scared, now everybody else reports you to the big dog. Now that should bring fear in you. Let's see if you say that to him. Okay. Verse 33. Then David said, or verse 32. Then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and will fight this Philistine. And now notice what Saul said. Saul said to David, you can't go. You're not able. How does he know that? Think about that for a second. How does Saul know he's not able? Guess what? This is still not about David. This is about Saul. He's just putting David in his place. I can't do it. So therefore, this is what we do. We put our fears on other people. Because you couldn't do something, you will tell your son, daughter, the church, other people that they can't do it because you didn't do it or you were too afraid to do it. So this is not about David. Saul is showing his cards. Saul is saying, I can't do it, but I'm just going to say you can't do it. Saul's showing his cards. And I think David knows this because remember, the Spirit of the Lord was upon him. So I think David knows what was going down. I think he knows. And sometimes, guys, that's what you have to be as you grow and as you mature. You have to start to see, is this something that I should be cautious about? Or is this something that you're just scared to do? It takes some time. I'm not saying you'll get it. Because it takes a long time to see this, and it takes a lot of prayer, and it takes a lot of wisdom. But you just take your time and look at some stuff, all right? So now watch what happens. You can't go, for you are just a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, verse 34, your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and when a lion or bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went and struck it. And I delivered the lamb out of its mouth, and when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck it and killed it. Your servants killed both lion and bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go and the Lord be with you. Now, did Saul really believe this? I don't know. We can't say. I don't know. But based off his track record, it's possible he's like, nah, just go. Just go. So Saul clothed David with his armor, and he put a bronze helmet on his head, and he clothed him with a coat of mail. And David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I can't walk in these. I haven't tested them. So David took them off. So he took his staff in his hand, and he chose 5 smooth stones from the brook and put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch which he had and a sling in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. Now, here's what's interesting. Don't let this fly over your head. The end of verse 40 is one thing that an entire nation and a king didn't want to do. And he drew near to the Philistine. The last thing that we read, what everybody else was doing in verse 27, and everybody else ran. That's what we see, right? We see everyone else, or verse 24, all the men of Israel fled and were afraid. This is the only time. Now, again, remember, keep Jonathan and David in mind. This is the only time we see another man running towards the Philistines. Question: was David the first one to do this? No. Who was the first to run towards the Philistines? Jonathan. Remember, he went with less men. He went with 1,000 the first time, then he went with 1. So keep this in mind. Notice how Jonathan and David's story is starting to become the same. But Jonathan ran towards the Philistines first. Now David's running towards the Philistine. This is so awesome. Verse 41. So the Philistine came and began to draw near to David, and the man who bore the shield went before him. The Philistines looked at him and saw David. He disdained him, for he was just a youth, ruddy and good looking. That's just a side note. That's the third time we've seen David called good looking. Look, man, I'm cool. I'm cool with being average. Okay, so that's not going to be on my description list, but that's just, I don't know. That's a weird side note. That's the third time we've seen David being called good looking, but that's beside the point. Verse 43. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by the gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, I will give your flesh to the birds, to the air, to the beasts of the field. Then David said to the Philistine, you come at me with a sword. Now, keep this in mind. You come at me with the sword. Remember earlier on with that battle between Saul and Jonathan and the Philistines? Who had all the swords? The Philistines. Who didn't have the swords? The Israelites. Only Jonathan and Saul had it. Interesting. You come at me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you've defied. This day, now notice, the Lord will deliver. What did Jonathan say? Again, we're connecting this to 1 Samuel 14. What did Jonathan say? Jonathan said, it might be that the Lord might work for us. For nothing restrains him from saving by many or saving by few. What's David saying? This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. That's the same language, isn't it? Interesting. Notice how the Lord is making their lives kind of go like this. Watch. The Lord will deliver you into my hands. I will strike you. I will take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds, and they will know that there is one God in Israel. Then all the assembly, verse 47, will know that the Lord does not save with the sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. So it was when the Philistine arose and drew near to meet David that David ran towards the army to meet the Philistine. That's the second time we see David running towards it. Look at what fearlessness will do. It'll make you run towards it. Why? Because of what I do, because of how good looking I am, right? Because of my power, because of my strength, because of my resources, because of who I am. No, it's because of God. It's because of God. That's what makes you run towards it. Here's the thing about fear before we keep going. Sometimes we don't run towards things. And again, I'm guilty of this as well. Sometimes we don't run towards things because we look too much at us. I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the strength. I don't have the experience. I don't have the whatever everybody's looking for. I just don't have it. So what's the purpose of me doing something? What's the purpose of me? Why should I do it? Why? It doesn't make sense. You see, we're stopping ourselves because we think we can achieve this fearlessness by our own power. And remember what Jesus says in the book of John, without me, you can do nothing. Once we realize that it's nothing out of what I can do, even if the thing is good, it's not of me. It's of his strength and his strength alone. That's why I can be fearless, because of him. It's not because of me. I'm fearful, but I can be fearless because of his strength and not mine. He changes me. So just like fear changed Saul for the bad, fearlessness can change you for the good. But you got to let God do the work, not you. Not you. So this is the second time we see David running towards it. 49. Then David put his hand in his bag, took a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine in his forehead. And the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell to his face to the earth. So then from 50 to 58, David cuts off Goliath's head, presents it in front of Saul, and Saul says, whose son is this? And he said, this is Jesse's son. This is Jesse's son, verse 58. Now we're going to close, and we're going to begin next week in 1 Samuel 18. And I want you to ponder this question based off of what we've studied. Look at Jonathan. Jonathan ran towards the Philistine. Jonathan gave the credit to God. Jonathan was fearless under Saul. David was the same. Now notice this, verse 1. Now when he had got done speaking to Saul after he got cut off Goliath's head, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David. Now, this is so awesome. Now, here's the danger. Many times when we talk to certain groups, right? Young married couples, we talk to singles, we talk to youth, we talk to older folks, and we bring up the friendship of Jonathan and David, and then we take that principle and say, well, this is how you should be for this and for them, and for good principles, but we really don't know why. Why was Jonathan and David's soul knit together? Why? Well, we're part of the same kingdom, so I guess we're knit together. Well, we're both Israelites, so that's cool. We're both knit together. We both like to fight, right? We're both guys of war, so that's how we're knit together. Are those things necessarily bad? Not at all. And can you be amazing friends with somebody because you have the same interests? Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely you can. But what knit them together, though? based off of our context of what we've been studying, everything up to this point, what knit Jonathan and David together? Both of them were fearless. They lived in a society and they lived in a kingdom of fear. Jonathan, all from what we saw, Jonathan was fearless. Now imagine Jonathan hearing this about David. You said what? He ran towards him? He ran towards the Philistine? He cut his head off? He said the Lord would deliver him into his hands? That's something that I did. And no one else did it either. So imagine those two now finally meeting. Man, I did this with the Philistines. Look what the Lord did for me. Well, look what the Lord did for me. So now guess what? Now you got their souls knit. Why? Because they feared God. That's why their souls were knit. Because they feared God. Imagine being Jonathan. Imagine feeling like you're the only one. Imagine feeling like there's no, you know how when you see, and again, we're talking about a friendship here, but here's the principle. You know how when you see people like, well, where's your better half? Where's this person? Where's that person? Think about Jonathan, man. And this might be you. Just think about him for a second. I've got my armor bearer with me. I'm thankful for that. Who else fears God? Does anybody fear God? He can't go home. Think about that. He can't go home. The fear of God is not in his house. He should find it there. Everybody else in Israel's afraid. Saul is troubling the land. He's doing all these things. He's being so passive aggressive. He's making things so much harder on the kingdom. I feel like I'm the only one fighting. But then you hear about another young man. He fought a Philistine too. He ran towards it too. He believed in God too. I got to meet this guy. Now their souls were knit together. That's why their souls were knit together. Because there's somebody else out there that despite the effects of what others may say, despite the company being taken away, despite you being the only one where you are, someone else doesn't think I'm crazy. Guys, if you don't know the value of that is, man, I can't explain it, man. Somebody else in this world, they don't think I'm crazy. They fear God too. Man, when you find that is, I don't know, man, it's refreshing because sometimes as a Christian, when you try to follow the Lord, sometimes you're put in the minority in a lot of ways. And sometimes, you can be seen and you can be painted as the villain. You're the one, you're the problem, you're the issue. But then to see that someone else doesn't think that you're the problem, that they see that you're not the crazy one, that you're actually the sane one. Someone else wants to fight these Philistines. Someone else believes that God can do this with us. Someone else has that level of faith that I have and we can grow that together. Someone else on this earth has that. I'm not letting go of this person. I'm not letting go of them. And that's why their souls from that day were knit together. You can't tear that apart. So Saul took him that day. Oh, he was knit to the soul of Jonathan, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. And Saul took him that day and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. Then Jonathan made a covenant because he loved him as his own soul. And that's where we stop. They made a covenant. Now, this is not the first covenant that we're going to see Jonathan and David make. Now, think about how this is set up, right? As we close, we look at the heart of fear and how that's rooted and built up into Saul and how he changed into the passive aggressive, intimidating leader he became. Now we see the kingdom taken away from him. Now we see Jonathan, his own son's fearlessness, and we see how he fears God. Then we see how David, how he had to deal with the same things within his own family. Now they both understand what it feels like for both of their families to fear, but they fear God. Now you have the story, you have all this stuff lining in every intricacy, and all these things like working in poetry and motion. Now all of this is working together. Now from this point, Jonathan and David are together, but there's going to be some stuff. There's going to be some issues. There's going to be some problems that I would never want anyone to face, but they're real. And Jonathan and David, their fearlessness and their fear of God, after this covenant in verse 3, it's getting ready to be tested. And it's getting ready to get real. But we stop here. Right, man, this is, you see how fruitful this is as we take time. We can't just read verse 18 and just run with it. Well, his soul was knit to David, but we have no idea why their souls were knit. We kind of just assume so many things, but we don't let the Bible tell us why their souls were knit together. We don't even look at Jonathan. We don't even give Jonathan the respect he deserves by looking at the stuff that he did. Now we start to see, this is why I'm friends with him, because he fears God. And as we close, do you see why I said on social media posts, on polls, on other things, do you see why I said this redefined biblical friendship for me? Biblical friendship. Because now what this does, this shows you, do they fear God? Do they fear God? Do I fear God? Now, there's so many ways. Like I said, I'm going through this with you in real time. There have been times where I did not fear God. I was fearful. And I'm sure if you're going to be honest, you were that too. But isn't it a beautiful thing that these men, even though they feared God, they were not perfect men. And we see that in David's life completely. We even see that from Jonathan. Were they perfect men? No. And so does a man and a woman that fears God and has a friendship with someone, based off of the teachings of Jesus, do they expect this person to be perfect? No, they don't, because they know they can't. But they do expect, when it's time to fear God, let's fear him together. And as we grow together and as we learn, there's so many ways and there's so many aspects, guys, where I need to get better. And there's so many attributes of Jonathan that I need. There's so many attributes of David that I need. There's so many attributes of Saul that I don't need and need to continue to rip away. But we have to look at ourselves and our red flags honestly so that we can move forward and have these level of friendships in Christ. That's where we want to be. So next week, Lord willing, we'll pick up in verse 4, and now it's going to start to get real quick. Real quick, we're going to start seeing that it's going to get real. So again, subscribe here. Love you guys. If you guys need anything, reach out, leave a comment here. Let us know what you think. Leave a comment on the show notes, wherever you find us on social media. Be a part of the conversation. If you guys need anything, you won't be the first one. Reach out. We want to be a part of your life and help you and be a part of the podcast family here. So we love you guys. And Lord willing, we will see you guys next week. Thanks, guys.